Nathaniel Reeves was 40 years old, a master electrician who had built a commercial contracting company on one operating principle: trace the fault before you repair anything. He drove a 5-year-old truck with a lift gate on the back. He kept his tools in the same order every day, not by habit, by system, because on a live job site the wrong reach costs you more than time. He was the kind of man who never touched a wire until he knew exactly where the other end was running. On a Thursday night in October, his wife sat across the kitchen table from him and told him everything. She told him about the 18-month affair. She told him about the surgery, the cardiac procedure, the $80,000 she had borrowed against their house to pay for it. She told him, between long silences, that 6 weeks after the surgery the man had left her for one of the nurses who had treated him during his recovery. She had lost the man she sacrificed everything for. She was telling her husband about it. Nathaniel listened without moving. When she finished, he asked her one question. She had no idea that question was the beginning. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The truck was loaded and running by 6:15 every morning. Nathaniel liked to pull into a job site before the crew arrived, not to check on them, but to walk the space alone, to look at the previous day's work in the early light, before the noise started, while everything was still visible. Reeves Electrical Group had 7 full-time technicians and 2 apprentices. He had started it 11 years ago with a commercial license, a used van, and a reputation he'd built over 5 years working under a senior foreman who ran jobs the same way. Plan it once, right, and you won't open a wall twice. He had taken that principle and applied it to everything: scheduling, hiring, client estimates, the specific way he organized the back of his truck. The company did commercial work, medical facilities, office buildings, mixed-use developments, steady, technical work that required reading specifications carefully and executing them without improvisation. He had never missed a final inspection. He was the kind of man who did not leave things half-finished. In anything. He and Brianna had been married 6 years. He had paid the deposit on the house on Caldwell Street the year before they married. A 4-bedroom, a full basement, a backyard with a stone patio he had laid himself over 3 weekends. He had covered the startup costs for her boutique, a small home decor and gift shop in the Millbrook district. $22,000 in her first year to bridge the gap between what she had and what it cost to open correctly. He had done this without conditions. He had not known, during any of that, what was already in motion. 3 months before the Thursday in October, he had been on the home computer looking for a vendor invoice when he saw the browser history. A Google alert, still open in a tab: aortic valve recovery complications. He had looked at it for a moment. Brianna had never mentioned any health concerns, her own or anyone else's. He had closed the tab and filed it away, in the same place he filed things that didn't yet have a shape. He understood its shape now. The kitchen was quiet when she sat down across from him. It was 9:22 in the evening. She had been crying before she came in, not from guilt. He would understand later, from the specific grief of someone who had paid an enormous price for something that had already been taken from them. She told him about Derek Watts. They had met through a mutual industry contact 18 months ago. She had not planned for it to become what it became, she said. She used that phrase more than once, did not plan for it, as though it had arrived the way weather arrives, rather than the way choices arrive. She told him about the surgery. Derek had needed an aortic valve replacement. Without it, his cardiologist had been direct about the prognosis. The surgery was $80,000 out of pocket. Derek's insurance had lapsed, and the procedure couldn't wait for new coverage to activate. She told Nathaniel she had used the home equity line of credit. Their house. She told him that 6 weeks after the surgery, Derek had told her he had developed feelings for a nurse named Tricia, who had managed his cardiac rehabilitation. He had ended things by text. He was apparently still with her. Brianna's hands were on the table. She looked at them. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that doesn't change anything." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "How much of the credit line did you use?" he said. "The full draw." 80,000. He nodded once. He did not throw anything. He did not raise his voice. He set down the coffee cup he had been holding and stood up with the deliberate unhurry of a man who has just identified where the fault is running and is deciding on the correct sequence for what comes next. He picked up his keys from the counter. He said he was going for a drive. He said they would figure out next steps through their attorneys. He left. He drove to a gas station 2 miles from the house and sat in the parking lot with the engine off. The Google alert he had closed 3 months ago was present in his mind now, cross-referenced against everything she had just said. He saw the shape of it. The alert. The dates she had been unreachable. The name she had mentioned once or twice, and then stopped mentioning. The way the household account had looked thin in August, and she had said it was a slow month for the boutique. He had seen all of it, and given it the benefit he always gave. That was what he was done extending. 2 years before that October evening, Nathaniel had still been building something he believed he was building with someone. He had spent the year before the surgery doing what he did every year, running his company, maintaining the house, showing up. He had finished the basement that spring, insulated it, run the electrical himself, installed recessed lighting and a dedicated circuit for the utility room. He had done it on weekends, 12 hours at a time, because the house was his, and that was how he took care of things that were his. Brianna had not been particularly interested in the basement. She had, around that same time, started attending a weekly evening class she described as a wellness workshop. He had not questioned it. He had not checked the schedule. When you trust someone, you do not build a system of verification around them. That is what trust means. He had noticed that her phone never left her hand when she was home. He had noticed that she mentioned her friend Camille constantly for several months, and then stopped mentioning Camille entirely, and when he asked about her, Brianna said they had grown apart. He had noticed that in August she had asked him to let her handle the household bills for a while, that she wanted to take some of that off his plate, and he had said sure without reading what handling the bills might include. He had seen all of these things. He had extended good faith past the evidence because that was what he believed people deserved, until they didn't. He would not make that same architectural mistake again. One Tuesday afternoon, his apprentice, a young man named Darnell, who had been with the company 8 months, had said to him while they were pulling conduit on a hospital retrofit, "Can I ask you something? How do you stay so steady on a job when everything's going wrong around you?" Nathaniel had thought about it. He said, "You stay in your lane and you run your ground. Everything else is just noise until the circuit's complete." He thought about that in the parking lot. He had been running his ground his entire life. He had just found out the circuit he thought he was building hadn't been complete for a year and a half. Her name was Claudette Bernard. She was 64 years old, a retired insurance adjuster who had worked claims for 26 years before her knees gave her a reason to stop. She was small and precise, with close-cropped gray hair and a garden that shared a stone wall with the backyard on Caldwell Street. She had been Nathaniel's neighbor for 11 years. She had been watching Brianna since the previous spring. She had not said anything, not because she was uncertain, because she had learned in 26 years of claims work that timing is the difference between useful information and noise. Nathaniel called her the Monday after the Thursday. He asked if she had some time. She said to come over whenever. She had a composition notebook on her kitchen table when he arrived. Black cover, elastic band around it, well used. She also had a manila folder beside it and a pot of coffee on the stove. "I'll tell you what I saw," she said, "and then I'll show you what I wrote down. Let me get through all of it before you say anything." He sat. She opened the notebook. 14 months of entries. Date, time, observation. License plate number. A gray Audi, registered to a Derek A. Watts, parked in front of the house or 2 doors down on 12 separate occasions across the 14 months. Always on weekday afternoons or evenings when Nathaniel's truck was gone from the driveway. She had written it all down in the specific, neutral shorthand of someone who had spent a career writing what she observed without editorializing. Nathaniel looked at the name. Derek A. Watts. He said nothing. The third entry from the bottom was dated 5 months earlier. She had been in her garden on a Saturday morning, on the other side of the stone wall, when she heard Brianna on her phone. She had written down what she heard. The surgery is scheduled for the 14th. "I have the funds ready. I need you to let me know what name the payment goes under." She had written it down verbatim. She had been in insurance for 26 years. She knew the weight of a sentence like that. "There's more," she said. She opened the folder. The first document was from Raymond Holt, Nathaniel's attorney, who had pulled the HELOC records the previous Friday. Brianna had executed the $80,000 draw using Nathaniel's durable power of attorney, the one he had signed 4 years ago to allow her to manage certain household finances during a period when he was running a demanding out-of-state project. The scope of that instrument did not include major credit draws against the primary residence. Nathaniel looked at the document. He set it down flat. "She used the power of attorney," he said. "She used the power of attorney," Claudette confirmed. "Raymond says it was outside its authorized scope. He's already spoken with a fraud specialist. He's already working on it," Nathaniel said. "Not a question. He called me last week. I gave him copies of the notebook." She paused. "I wanted him to have the full picture before you did, so that by the time I sat across from you at this table, there was already something being done about it." Second document. Sandra Yee's preliminary financial summary, prepared over 3 days. 12 months of household account activity. What it showed was not the $80,000 Brianna had confessed to. It showed $80,000 drawn from the HELOC. It also showed $47,000 in transfers from their joint investment account, 29 transactions over 14 months, each between $1,200 and $2,800, moving to a personal account in Brianna's name alone. An account Nathaniel had not known existed. Total, $127,000. She had confessed to $80,000. She had taken $127,000. Nathaniel stood up from the table. He walked to the window and looked at the back garden, his stone wall, the patio he had laid himself, the yard. He stood there long enough to take in the full shape of what Sandra Yee's summary was showing him. She had told him everything she believed he could find. She had not told him about the $47,000 because she believed those transfers were invisible. She had not understood that invisible is not the same as gone. He came back to the table. He sat down. He looked at both documents together. The HELOC draw, executed with an instrument she wasn't authorized to use for that purpose. The investment account transfers, structured to stay below thresholds. One a misuse of trust, signed in good faith. The other a construction, built carefully, over time, piece by piece. He could see the complete circuit now, every connection, every line, the full path of the current from one end to the other. "All right," he said. Claudette poured coffee into his cup without being asked. She sat back. "All right," he said again, quieter. He didn't move fast. That's what people never understand about this part. Raymond Holt had been in motion since the Monday Nathaniel called him. He was a methodical man who worked before sunrise and called clients at 7 a.m. with a voice that treated bad news and good news with the same unhurried precision. He had filed a fraud notice related to the HELOC draw within 48 hours of reviewing Claudette's documentation. He had put Sandra Yee on the account transfers immediately after. Sandra had her full analysis completed by Wednesday. The $47,000 in transfers, the account structure, the timing relative to the HELOC draw, the specific months where withdrawals from the investment account coincided with Brianna's documented business with Derek Watts. It was thorough, sourced, and organized the way Sandra organized everything, the way a document should look when someone who didn't believe you was going to read it. Brianna called on a Tuesday. Her voice was careful and low. She said she knew she had no right to ask for anything, but she hoped they could handle this in a way that wasn't destructive for either of them. She said she had already spoken to an attorney. She said she understood that the house would probably have to be sold to address the HELOC. He let her finish. He said he appreciated her calling. He said Raymond would be in touch. She called again on Thursday. This call was different, still careful but more specific. She mentioned the boutique, the shared assets, the timeline she hoped they could work toward. She mentioned the HELOC twice. Each time she called it the $80,000. She did not mention the additional transfers. She did not know he knew about the additional transfers. He listened to both calls. He did not call back. She thought the accounting was going to cover what she had confessed to. She had made the mistake that people make when they get ahead of themselves. She had decided what Nathaniel knew rather than finding out. She had given him a number and watched how he responded to it, and concluded that the number was the whole picture. It was not. She had seen his patience his entire life and never once understood what it was. Patience was the practice of someone who waits until the circuit is complete before he throws the switch. He called Claudette the evening before the settlement conference. "She thinks she confessed to everything," he said. Claudette was quiet for a moment. "Let her think it," she said. Nathaniel arrived 40 minutes early. The conference room was on the 12th floor of a building in the legal district. A long table, neutral walls, a window that showed a gray November sky. The room was the kind of room that holds proceedings without commentary, that does not align itself with either party. Raymond arrived at 8:55, followed by Sandra Yee. They organized their materials without speaking. Sandra's forensic summary was bookmarked with 3 colored tabs. Brianna arrived at 9:11 with her attorney, a woman named Carver, who moved efficiently and sat with the controlled composure of someone who had prepared thoroughly for a proceeding of limited complexity. Brianna sat across from Nathaniel. She looked at him briefly, a look that was asking for something he hadn't decided to give yet. Then she looked at Carver. Carver opened with a reasonable framing. She acknowledged the HELOC draw. She acknowledged that it had been executed in a manner that required legal address. She used the word address as though the matter were a plumbing issue, regrettable, identifiable, repairable at a fixed cost. She mentioned the $80,000 twice in her opening. She treated it as the totality of the financial issue. Raymond waited until she had finished. "Before we move to the HELOC," he said, "I'd like to establish the full scope of the financial matters before this proceeding." He opened his folder. He placed the first document on the center of the table. He slid a copy to Carver. Carver picked it up. She read it. She set it down. She looked at it again. "This is Sandra Yi's forensic account analysis," Raymond said, "covering 14 months of joint investment account activity. It documents 29 transfers from the joint investment account to a single-party personal account registered to Mrs. Reeves, totaling $47,000. None of these transfers were disclosed to Mr. Reeves. Brianna had gone very still. Carver said, "I was not made aware of this account." "The account was opened 14 months ago," Raymond said. His voice did not change. The transfer pattern was structured to remain below standard reporting thresholds. "Sandra can walk through the specific transactions." Sandra walked through them. She was precise and unhurried, and did not add emphasis to any numbers she read aloud. She let the numbers do what numbers do when they are accurate and documented and organized correctly. When Sandra finished, the room was quiet. "Total financial matters before this proceeding," Raymond said, "amount to $127,000, the $80,000 HELOC draw, and $47,000 in undisclosed transfers. A civil fraud filing related to both instruments has been prepared and is ready to be filed upon conclusion of this session, unless a satisfactory resolution is reached today." Carver put down her pen. She looked at her client. Brianna looked at Nathaniel. Something moved across her face. Not surprise exactly, the specific expression of a person who has prepared for a test they expected to pass and discovered mid-question that the version they studied was not the version being administered. She had confessed to $80,000 because she believed that was what he had. Nathaniel watched it arrive in her face. He looked at the window. The gray November sky. In 4 hours he was due on a job site in the Port District for a panel inspection. The second document, the HELOC authorization record, with the durable power of attorney instrument attached, and the specific language of its authorized scope highlighted. Raymond walked through it in 30 seconds. Misuse of scope. Fraud notice already filed with the lending institution. The third document, a property valuation. Nathaniel had had the house appraised the previous week. Current value. Outstanding mortgage balance. The equity position, which, with the HELOC draw addressed, remained sufficient for Nathaniel to retain the property and satisfy the debt, if the settlement terms accounted correctly for the $127,000. "We are prepared to present a resolution framework," Raymond said, "under which Mr. Reeves retains the primary residence. The HELOC draw is assigned as a marital debt to Mrs. Reeves, and the $47,000 in undisclosed transfers is addressed through a structured repayment arrangement." Carver asked for a recess. "Of course," Raymond said. Nathaniel stood. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Raymond's hand. He shook Sandra Yi's hand. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned. He looked at Brianna directly. She was looking at the forensic summary on the table in front of her. He said it quietly. "Clearly, you confessed to what you thought I could prove. I proved the rest." He walked out. It did not resolve all at once. Carver needed 3 days to consult with Brianna on the revised scope of the proceeding. The civil fraud filing, already prepared, created a timeline that did not allow for extended negotiation. They settled on the 8th day. The terms, the $80,000 HELOC draw was assigned to Brianna as a separate debt, to be resolved through her boutique's assets and a structured payment arrangement over 20 months. The $47,000 in undisclosed transfers was repaid through a lien against the boutique's inventory and receivables. Nathaniel retained the house on Caldwell Street. The boutique closed 8 months later. The inventory didn't cover the full lien amount, and the supplemental payment plan ran 18 months beyond that. Derek Watts and the nurse were, by all available accounts, still together. Nathaniel did not think about Derek Watts. He had spent exactly as much time thinking about Derek Watts as Derek Watts had spent thinking about him. Which was none, and which was correct. A man who runs ground on a live system does not spend time on what the previous installer was doing wrong. He runs his ground and moves to the next connection. He refinished the back patio that spring. The stone had lifted in 2 places over the winter, the freeze-thaw cycle getting into a joint he hadn't packed tightly enough the first time. He lifted the affected stones himself, rebedded them properly, and reset them. He knew the work now better than he had known it the first time. Darnell made journeyman status in the fall. Nathaniel had him run his first independent panel installation on a medical retrofit in the North District. He walked the completed work with Darnell afterward, the same way he walked every job, not looking for errors, looking at what had been built. At one connection, he pointed out a wire bend that was technically within code, but would create resistance over time. "You won't fail inspection," he said, "but in 10 years, you'll open this panel and know you bent it wrong." He looked at Darnell. "Finish everything like it's going to be opened again." Darnell nodded. He went back and corrected the bend. Claudette came for dinner in December. She brought a bottle of wine she said she had been saving for the right occasion. She sat at his kitchen table, the same table where Brianna had sat in October, and looked around the room. "You kept the house," she said. "I kept the house," he said. On a morning in late January, Nathaniel Reeves arrived at a hospital retrofit job site in the medical district before his crew, the way he always arrived. The building was quiet and cold. The electrical room on the 2nd floor was his first stop, a main distribution panel, 300 amperes, 4 circuits yet to be connected. He set his bag down. He put on his gloves. He looked at the panel the way he looked at every panel, not starting with any individual wire, but reading the whole board first. Understanding the load. Knowing where the current was meant to run before he touched anything. The crew arrived at 7:00. He could hear them on the stairs. He picked up his tools. He began. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.